Welcome to the Herpcore History podcast, presented to you by Little Shop of Horrors. Feel free to reach out to us on any of our social media platforms for any of your feeder needs. All right, let's go ahead and get into this episode.
All right. Tonight I'm joined by Jeff Adams, one of the founding members of the Snake Days here in Texas, and also ran his own podcast back in the day about reptiles. So thank you for joining me, Mr. Adams. I'm glad to have you here.
Well, thank you. I appreciate you having me on.
Excellent. So where'd you grow up? Where are you from?
I am basically from San Antonio. I grew up pretty much around here. Did a few years in Uvalde as a kid, and was actually born at Camp Lejeune. But all my family was here. My mom was just visiting my dad on leave during World War II, and lo and behold, I ended up being born in Camp Lejeune, North Carolina. But and only spent a couple of weeks there my entire life and never been back.
Excellent. All right. And what got you into reptiles? What was your earliest experience with that?
Man, I have been in reptiles my entire life. Just have really enjoyed being around them as a young kid, like so many other kids, dragging home ribbon snakes, garter snakes. My mom, as a little kid, went to put my laundry away, and there was a sock jumping around in the drawer that had a ribbon snake in there that I had found. And my mom, needless to say, did not have the love for snakes and never will, never has. And she was freaked out. Another time, found a 12-foot Burmese python in a dog kennel in my closet. So my mom's been kind of traumatized through the years with my love for reptiles.
So early on there, you started with wild caught stuff, and then obviously you got into more captive stuff.
I
What?
did. Actually, the python was just was borrowed from some people who've been around for a long time past, Tony and Diane Surratt. I wanted to get out of final testing the school for school early, and so I took that big berm and laid it up on the desk in high school, and so they let me leave directly after completing the exam and go home early.
All right. Well, I've never heard that, but that works. I guess it works better than the dog ate my homework.
Well, the funny thing is that same python that I borrowed, it was found in Salado Creek here in San Antonio and had screwed up nostrils. People were hitting it in the head that were down there fishing, and they took
Hmm.
that thing, and it was just super tame. And that's the same snake that Jake the Snake early on in his wrestling career would rent and drag around because it was so docile and tame. He would drag that thing around the wrestling arena when back in the '80s when Jake the Snake Roberts was wrestling. So that snake had made his way around definitely.
That's pretty crazy. It was always putting on a show, no matter where it was. That's what are the chances?
Yeah, no, it's and that's what's kind of cool about it. And I've been telling people that the color across the board, it doesn't matter what it is, but the color in life seems to be fading. And I like the idea of you documenting these things because there's a lot of rich history. A lot of people have passed on, and I just don't see the newer generation being as colorful. And you can equate that to music, anything else, everything from the late '50s to say right around the early 2000s was some of the greatest music, no matter what the genre was. Well, the same thing can be said with a lot of the early reptile enthusiasts. Where I mean, we used to just sleep on picnic benches, and people would just lay a sleeping bag out along the highway. And back in the early days when there wasn't so much traffic on Highway 90, and people would just lay down alongside the road, pull off the road, and go to sleep. And it was pretty common to see a herper crashed out in Bill Chamberlain's parking lot, or running into somebody sleeping at the rest areas down in South Texas, down by Four Corners at 624 and 16, and they'd be just they looked like they were passed out drunk, but just asleep, and that's just how we did it back then.
Yes, sir. Yeah. That it's so funny, right? Like I've thought about doing that before, like on one of those little rest areas, throwing up something just to sleep for the night and move on. And I've never done that. And I wonder too how much of that has to do, like when I go out herping, it's solely at night. Normally um we're getting back at 4 in the morning, and then I'm sleeping till 1 o'clock, and then showering, eating, and then going laying back down, and then snake hunt until 4 or 5 in the morning again. And so, but my buddies, their first trips out to West Texas, they were sleeping in tents, and but now I'm like, oh my god, that'd be sleeping in the heat like that. That'd be crazy.
Oh no, that's the same way. Or without having a shower. As I've become older, I appreciate the finer things such as running water, a hot shower, a mattress. I've had a couple of back surgeries, and sleeping on the ground like that just kills me now. But yeah, I mean, it went on forever, and I was real privileged growing up because I had a good friend. His name was Jeff, also Jeff Reed, and his dad was a herpetologist, although he did it non-professionally, and he worked in law enforcement, but he had a degree in herpetology and did a lot of stuff with Johnny Whirler in the zoos, and discovered a alligator lizard down in Mexico that later on was described and named after him, the Abronio reedi and stuff. And so I always tell these stories of, we were always going out snake hunting and dragging things home. And his dad, I was very fortunate. I was in elementary school, and I found a big splendida and threw it in with my buddy's cow king, not knowing any better. And luckily they didn't kill each other because one was a male, one was female, and the splendida was ovulating. And so, they bred, and I was, I don't know, somewhere between third and fifth grade, and I said, man, I'm gonna make a new snake. It's gonna be a new type of snake. And he said, no, you're not. You're just gonna have a crossbred animal, and not even really an intergrade, but just crossbred between a cow king and a splendida. And back then we didn't have all these different substrates, so everything had to be done in a Pyrex dish. I laugh now, because everything's Rubbermaid or some type of off plastic, but back then, I mean, the recipe for everything was a Pyrex dish, and if you didn't use Pyrex, I don't know, you were behind the times. They called you names, whatever, but it had to be your mom's Pyrex dish. And you had to boil sand. So we would boil the sand, kill everything in it, and then strain it. And that was our substrate, and use paper towels with it to hatch things. And so, learning as a kid, somewhere between third and fifth grade, on how to hatch snakes this way, how to hatch out eggs. And no, needless to say, these king snakes all mated, and everything went very smoothly. And they came out, and they didn't look like the parents. They were really kind of mixed match type of deals. And so I said, "Oh man, I knew it. I created a hybrid." And he says, "No, you don't know that." And he says, "You got to go get a magnifying glass." And back then, we're talking in the 70s, you didn't have documentation just laying around like we do now that you can Google and get. So he said, "Go get the male." He already knew what the scale count would be on the Splendida. He had a book on that. And go get the babies. So we sat there at a dining room table with a magnifying glass doing a scale count in elementary school, mind you. And after we were all said and done, he said, "Okay, yeah, this is a hybrid based off the scale count and the coloration and pattern and everything." And I said, I knew it." And he said, "You didn't know it, but you know it now." Well, roll forward, he died several years back, and Tom Lott, I don't know if you know Tom Lott, but Tom Lott wrote a memorial to Jack. Him and Jack had published some papers under the tutelage of Johnny Whirler, and he wrote that this man had the ability to teach you without you being taught. And so at that time, probably 40 years had gone by when all of this was occurring, and all of a sudden it hit me. And I had never thought about doing this, learning that scale count on that day and doing that. And all of a sudden I go, oh my God, he's right. And I thought, what a slow learner. It took me 40 years to learn his lesson. you know and so I mean, what a great lesson to be able to learn from somebody like that. And so I learned how to do a scale count, um and never realized that I learned how to do it. It took 40 years to realize what I had learned, and how many kids were doing that in elementary school.
Yeah, no, not many. And especially to your point about, you know, the color and life changing over time, and getting to talk to some of these early keepers, information was so hard to find, right? And
Oh
so
yeah.
for you to be able to stumble into, such a wonderful learning resource, and a gentleman that not only was passionate about it, but wanted to educate people about it, right? Whether it was your interest in it, I think many of us, right, we're the product of a fellow reptile enthusiast taking the time to educate us. And for you to run into someone that was so educated in it so early on, what are the chances of that?
Right. No, and he was well known for that. He had always do things with Cub Scouts and Boy Scouts and different groups like that, and started him and Johnny Whirler started the first ever um, uh, herpetological society here in the San Antonio area way back when and stuff. And and that's just kind of how it was. But you had a lot of people that were like that, and they're all gone now, or not all of them, but a lot of them. You had a lot of in the alternate cult. You had John Hollister, Buzz Ross. There was a whole bunch of people, and someone had posted um, a picture of an old group of people in Del Rio at a hotel we used to stay at. And there was probably 30 of us there in this photo. And this is just a few years ago, and they posted online, and it was probably from around maybe 1986, maybe 88, somewhere in there. And I made the comment, said, "Oh my God, look at all the old timers in there." And I got a message back from Damon, and Damon says, "What are you talking about? You're on the second row, left hand side." And I blew up the picture, and I go, "Oh damn, I am! Oh my God, I'm an old timer." I was a kid. I was probably 20, maybe 22 back then, somewhere in there. Depending on what year that was, and just have never thought of myself as being an old timer going back that far, because you get to that age, and the 1980s just doesn't seem like that was all that long ago. And you start counting with your fingers and toes, you go, good God, that's a long time ago.
Yeah, right. Time flies, and it is kind of interesting. I'm definitely guilty of that myself, where it's like, oh, I'm an adult. Like, oh, okay. I mean, not too long
Right.
ago, I was the kid, running around a pet shop, and now I'm an adult.
Right. No, no, that's exactly right. And we kind of forget about that, and we look back on these stories, and going back in the early days, back out to West Texas, and I first started hunting out there probably, oh God, somewhere around 1980. I don't even remember now. I was 15 years old, and our parents let us drive. We were doing some other stuff out there, and I found I found a few things. It was summertime and stuff, and um, had a good trip out there. Went out there for Texas Sesquicentennial and did some different things. And went out to Marfa and so forth. And back then there wasn't even, your parents didn't think much about it. Now I don't think our parents knew that we were drinking as we were driving out there, but there was nothing out there back then. And so a group of us drove out there for the Sesquicentennial and did a trail ride from Fort Davis. From the fort, we slept in the barracks and did a trail ride to down to Marfa and stuff. And of course, as I'm going, I'm looking for snakes and so forth. Um, so I mean, it goes back to the love of West Texas and snakes, going back that far, and um, it's just grown and grown. It's never gone away. I kind of go in and out doing different things and having different likes or different dislikes and so forth. But the love of reptile and amphibians has just always been there, and it never ceases to amaze me of how much we learn from other people. I've been very fortunate that because of starting Snake Days, getting to do stuff with. I sat around one day when I was doing a show for Herp Nation Media, and we called it radio back then. Now they're podcasts, but they were internet radio, so to speak, and so forth. And so we had Herp Nation radio, And I was going to do a show, and I don't even remember what I was going to do it on. And I was there with Dr. Chris Parkinson and now Dr. Jason Strickland. And he was a PhD student, and they had a whole bunch of animals to process and pickle for the lab. A lot of different roadkills that came in from snake days and so forth. And we started talking about some things, and Dr. Parkinson turned out to be just fascinating, had so much information. So I said, you know what, I was going to do my show on this, but guess what, you are now my guest. And we recorded that from out there in Sanderson at a house that we have out there, and sat right there and recorded the show on how the scientific community pickles animals, and how, it's not like it used to be where you just go out and just go pick up 40 Berlanderite tortoise and pickle them all. All of that's changed, and so it was a really good episode to educate people of the hoops that have to be jumped through in order to acquire live animals, and then euthanize them and pickle them for different research. And so I've been very fortunate to be able to sit down and talk and work with some of these different individuals, even though, hell, I don't even have a college degree, but I've been fortunate enough to be brought in on some of these things. And it's always been a learning experience. And every time I afforded the ability to do that, I always learned something. And I think that's important. I always tell people we're always going to learn until the day someone's standing over the top of you going, "Oh wow, he looks so natural."
Yeah. Well, and that's the interesting thing about reptile keeping is a lot of people are self-educated about it and very knowledgeable. And that's a good thing about the hobby.
Well, and we had to be. We didn't have all this online stuff, so we had to go out and do these things, and it was a word of mouth from some of the old timers that truly old timers. There's a few left. Craig Trumbauer is still around, and there's a few of the truly old timers that had to go out and figure these things out on their own. And you made a few friends, and you talked about it. But we also didn't give up all of our secrets either, because we were all trying to breed, or we were all trying to collect at a specific area. And is some of the famous old stories of Palma and Lozier Canyon out in West Texas, where John Hollister didn't want any competition and told a group of guys to go out there, and said he heard that was a hot spot. And all of a sudden they came back with several alternatives they found, and the rest is history about Palma and Lozier Canyon. And that has happened more times than not. And you talk to some of the people that were herping out there back in the 60s and stuff, like Dave Barker, and a lot of people didn't know where to go. They would just start driving at Uvalde, or they would start driving in Bracketville, or even Eagle Pass. Um, and they didn't know where to go. I mean, there was just so little known. And so those early people are the ones that have really discovered so much and provided so much information. Now, it's all out there for free to take, and just with a simple Google search and stuff. But it wasn't like that when we first got started. I mean, we didn't have vermiculite. We went and dug sand out of the yard somewhere out of a sand pit and boiled it for our substrate, and that's how that worked. We didn't have all that. We had to build all our cages out of wood, and of course we used screen, which wasn't the best thing, and animals rubbing their nose, and had to get better about how we built cages, and how we did ventilation of cages. Then we started making these cages out of glass and other materials that were not breathable very well, and started having issues with animals getting respiratory infections and getting sick, and then having to learn husbandry. It wasn't like a dog or a cat where you ran to the neighborhood vet and got treatment. There wasn't hardly anybody around treating reptiles and amphibians back then. And so all the husbandry was all learned and self-taught, and one person would figure out something and share it with somebody, and someone else would figure out something else and share that with somebody, and that's how it was back then. I mean, you had guys doing their own C-sections. Ron Trimper would do C-sections on veiled chameleons to get the eggs out, and then later on in life found out, well, hell, if I cut back their food a little bit, they don't get egg bound as much. Give them enough food to breed and have eggs, but not so much that they're having these gigantic eggs and getting egg bound. And there's a lot of truth in that, and it took him doing C-sections to figure that out on chameleons.
Yes, sir. Yeah, and it's a double-edged sword, especially in the field that that I'm in now, I get to come in contact with all aspects of the modern day reptile community. So it's a lot of really hardcore keepers and breeders that I get to deal with, and then I get to deal with the person that has, their first pet snake.
Right.
And it's so interesting how, besides just me keeping snakes personally, once I got into the hobby where I was, volunteering and then end up working at a pet shop, I'm fielding a lot of the same questions. And I'm always surprised by it, where it's like, there's so many resources out there and it's so readily available. But the problem with that, too, is that anybody can make the post about, oh, this is the way to do it. You look at Facebook groups now, and soccer mom Sally with her first pet snake, her son's pet snake or daughter's pet snake, comes in and they're just trying to educate themselves, and they ask a question which, it might be a silly question, or the animal isn't in the best shape at the moment, and it's an onslaught of people either bashing the person or just juxtapose opinions about this is the way to do it or that's the way to do it, and everybody's an expert. And so, what does that person really learn? I don't think they're learning much out of the situation, and it's unfortunate that it is that way.
It's funny because I was going to mention that a little while ago, and I'm glad you brought that up. And I always tell everyone that we're all a bunch of self-proclaimed idiots. We all are experts in our own mind, and quite often we can shut ourselves off thinking that we know it all, and we have to sometimes take a deep breath and go, you know what, I don't know it all. But one of the big things that happened, especially with rattlesnakes and stuff, when they were trying to do a lot of rattlesnake conservation, I was asked to try to help with that. And I said, here's the problem. I said, you have a lot of loose cannons in your group, so that if someone posts a picture of a dead rattlesnake, some guy is going off and going ballistic and going, you stupid effing idiot, and everything else. And I said, and here's the problem with that is you have now guaranteed that that person will kill every snake that they see. Okay. Instead of trying to educate them and say, hey, you're not going to catch any disease from that snake. There's only one snake bite fatality in this country annually on average, I mean, so there's not that big of a deal. It's been instilled in us to fear snakes, even biblically, it's self-taught. A big part of it is self-taught, the fear. And when we treat someone like that, instead of educating them and go, hey, this snake isn't going to spread any real disease to you, and it's going to control mice and rats, and with the outbreak of hantavirus and the paramyscus mice and different things that occur, it is doing a big, big favor for you. And if you look at the reports, and where the going way, way back, and a lot of the Native Americans were dying on the Indian reservation, and one of the things that they came up with in the study, and I think it was from the CDC, if not, it was from a university that study, but I think it was the CDC, is that there was a lack of snakes on the reservation. And they had enough filth on the reservation to attract the mice, but they didn't have enough natural predators, and not just the snakes, but the snakes was actually mentioned in a report that I read way, way back, on the outbreak of the hantavirus there in Arizona and New Mexico. And again, we tend to remove so much of that. You've got guys that they think they're doing something good, and they shoot every coyote that they see, and well, it's going to eat a fawn. Well, good, it's supposed to eat a fawn. It's supposed to. We're supposed to have a recruitment of around 25%, and if we start having too many deer, we end up with some of the problems that they've had in other parts of the country, where they start to starve and die off, and they shrink in stature. Mother Nature tends to shrink animals in size when it becomes too competitive, everywhere except like Galapagos and stuff like that, where all of a sudden they grew to gigantic. But that's not the norm. Most things start to get small when it becomes very competitive for food. And we have to really be careful on how we educate people. And although we may not agree with the rattlesnake roundups, okay, for instance, when you go out there and you start yelling and screaming and bashing people at those things, you are only going to instill the hatred and more killing of those animals rather than having a discussion and go, hey, I'm a big hunter myself. And start talking about it and go, yeah, but I do it differently, and I hunt with a camera and I upload data to different formats, whether that's iNaturalist or some of the other deals out there, and so forth. Then the education will get to a small percentage, but when you don't try to educate somebody, it gets to 0% of the population.
Yes, sir. Yeah, for sure. And that's, it, because right, it is frustrating when you see the person post the picture of the maimed snake or the snake stuck on the glue trap or whatever it is. But I 100% agree. Where being, you have to look at yourself and understand that people don't know what you know. And so you have to sit there and humble yourself and be willing to communicate with those people, 100%, 100%.
Well, and
And
they've been indoctrinated. My grandfather killed every snake. Every damn snake that came across a water puddle was a cottonmouth, and there was no change in that. That generation has died out. Loved my grandfather to death, but there was no convincing him that it wasn't a cottonmouth, and even to the point of being belligerent. Damn it, boy! I know a cottonmouth when I see one. Well, it's a checker garter. It's got a white mouth. Well, okay, it's a checker garter, and that's how that was, and so now we've got a group of people that are the next generation, and we have the ability to shape and mold those people with an education. And if we insult them, it doesn't work. It just doesn't. And I'm the most argumentative person you've ever met. I always tell people I can't be out argued. I got an ex-wife to prove it. I can argue my way out of anything. And but at the same time, there's also a time there's a time to make an argument, and there's a time to try to educate somebody, and we have to balance that. And quite often emotion gets in the way. We all become emotional about something, and for this group, it's reptiles and amphibians, and glue traps are just the most evil, horrible thing God ever allowed to be created. And um, but telling someone they're a stupid SOB for putting out a glue trap just means they just run into the hardware store and buying 10 more, rather than discussing a few things with them. And the late Tim Cole was beautiful at that. He was always doing reptile removal, and he would tell people, said, you can keep having me come back and remove these, but you've created an environment that's attracted the food source, and with the food comes the rattlesnakes. And so he would go and remove rattlesnakes, but I would say, hey, let's work on making changes to this, and this. Let's cut this, let's move this, and do these things, and get rid of the harborage, and get rid of the food supply, and you won't have these problems. And he was pretty good at doing that. I'd heard him talk to a few people through the years with that, and he was very good at educating people. And I hope that the next generations are going to be the same, but I'm not convinced of that yet. So it's not too late, but it's also a failure of our generation of not getting the next generation ready to step into our shoes, and we haven't done a good enough job with that. And I don't know how we do a better job, honestly, but I just know we haven't done a good enough job to replace the color that's been lost. You know.
yeah, well, and it's kind of a concentration of people over time. I think that to double back for a second, the approach that I've ended up taking, where and listen, I'm guilty of it myself, where maybe I should engage more in conversations about these animals and what they mean to the environment, or educating people, and I find myself choosing to just keep scrolling and not engage in the hour-long conversation. But when I do find myself in that situation, it's trying to explain to people the time that goes into that animal getting to the size or the age that it is, and trying to put that person, trying to not put them in that animal's shoes, but just try to explain it, where I don't think people understand the time it takes for a snake to reach maturity, or when you do get the opportunity to see a large rattlesnake, that snake has lived for 15, 20 years. Its
Right.
only defense is its most vulnerable part of its body, and it's waited for a rat to crawl in front of it to be able to eat, or rat, rabbit, whatever it is. What are the chances? And everything hates it. How amazing is that animal got to that, right? You hate snakes, and all your buddies hate snakes, and every snake you see, you kill. And think about how many snakes you see dead on the side of the road. And then you see this outlier animal, or any animal, it doesn't matter whether it's a year, 3 years. Could you imagine being a little, nature's gummy bear crawling around in life, and you make it to any, whether it's 6 months? I wouldn't last that long. And trying to explain it to people that way. And, whether,
And there's not great studies on that, but no, you're hitting on something very good. And we just had that discussion at Snake Days on the horn lizard and the recruitment of that, and it's very low in the reptile world. You're looking at 10 to 20% on certain things recruitment, so it's very very low to get these animals to adult breeding size and be productive as a specimen for reproduction. Um, and that's a big issue. It's a real big issue, and a lot of what we've created with the habitat fragmentation is greatly has greatly hurt a lot of that, and trying to get people to understand what we've done in the state with cross fencing, overgrazing, the lack of the grasslands. I learned a lot from Dr. Andy Glusenkamp many years ago. We had a conversation about the non-indigenous and invasive grasses and what they've done to Texas, and he was way ahead of the time. I don't know if he was the leader of this or not, but he was definitely a loud spokesperson about it, and the fact that we've lost our prairies. I always tell people that oh, my oak trees are getting oak wilt. Well, good, they're not supposed to be there. We're supposed to be worried whether we're on Comanche land, or whether we're going to be run over by a herd of bison, or whether a fast moving grass fire is going to come through here, and can we get away fast enough. And that's what we were supposed to have. And a lot of people don't realize this, but we had pronghorn antelope at one time, way back when. It's been documented that they were not that far outside of San Antonio, was part of their natural range. It wasn't all that long ago in my lifetime that we had pronghorn antelope on the west side of Sanderson. I've got pictures of them with an old Sony Mavica camera, one of the first digital cameras that came out. And they're long gone now because of all the scrub brush that's moved in and so forth. So the terrain has completely changed and been reshaped, and a lot of times not for the better. When you start looking at the loss of box turtles, the loss of Mexican hognose, and a lot of your plain species are lost. I mean, they're not going to make it unless we get these grasses coming back. And of course, same thing with the horn lizard and the horn lizard reintroduction. I think there's a lot of failures with that. We don't, we don't have the right habitat. We need to spend more time on correcting the habitat. And I've gotten now with participating in that a little bit, and talking to Dusty Roads on stuff. You can drive down the roads in South Texas at 70 miles an hour, and you can recognize whether there's going to be a chance of finding much as far as horn lizards or not, based on the grass species you see alongside the road when you're driving. I mean,
yeah.
it's that easy to do now.
Well, that was something interesting I heard a while ago, and I can't remember where I listened to it, but it was talking about the scrub brush that we have in South Texas, that used to be impenetrable, and the amount of brush that you see when you see a large amount where it's like, oh, you couldn't get through this. That's not. It's supposed to be even more than that. And so you know, the species that we've lost that rely on that habitat, or plains. I think again, I was listening to another thing where it's talking about grasslands and plains are some of the most endangered environments throughout the United States, and millions of acres are lost a year.
Yeah.
And you know, it needs to be protected.
Yeah, it's going to take a lot of fires, and along the way, and I've had this conversation a lot with different people, and when I was a kid down in South Texas, they used to chain the brush out, and that was politically incorrect. Oh, it's killing a lot of animals. Well, it is, but so did the fast moving grass fires. A lot of animals did not get out of the way of the very fast moving grass fires, and those fast moving grass fires is what prevented all of the thorn scrub, the Tamaulipan environment from coming this far north, because it burned them out. There were little small saplings coming up and they were burned out. Same thing with the cedar, and the same thing with the oak. Now you would find that occasional gigantic oak that made it because the fire didn't get it, but for the most part, we just didn't have these oaks and all the stuff. You had it down in the bottomlands of along the canyons, but you didn't have it anywhere else, and you had the grassy prairies. And for the longest time, I'd been asking, what's happening to the Mexican hognose? Wasn't all that long ago that they were everywhere, right? They weren't over collected. Yeah, you had Border Patrol guys picking them up and like that. But they ended up just kind of disappearing, and they disappeared overnight. And I kept asking, what happened to him? What happened to him? What happened to him? And what it was is that we had an issue where we've lost the grasslands, and so we've lost all these plain species. And the only way we're going to get it back is to get the plains back.
Yes, sir. Yeah. Well, and that's, yeah, whether even cedar trees, kind of understanding that those played an ecosystem, and it's not the cedar tree that we're looking at that's 5 feet tall. That's not what cedar trees were here at a certain point. We're talking about massive cedar trees, and then there being a commercial scale harvest that would clean cut areas with cedar trees, and we lost that old growth cedar tree, you know, areas. And that's not something I was always told. Oh, cedar trees, that's why these rivers don't run anymore. Well, in many areas, cedar trees were the species that were there, and they play the part in keeping oak blight out of areas, and growing soil in these limestone environments that they have many species that feed off of them. And so there's such a lack of understanding. I think it's in general, and you run into the landowners that do understand the nuance of what they're doing, but Texas is Texas, and there's a weird way they look at it, but that's also the strong suit of Texas, that we're not worried about the populations of Alterna and these other species because there is so much private land. It's a double-edged sword again.
Right, right. Well, and the funny thing is too, and I've had this conversation with a lot of different people. Jerry Salmon and I go snake hunting. We talk about a lot of this stuff, and one of the problems you have is we tend to look at a very small time stamp. Okay, and really, what we have to do is we have to go back to what we have documented, and that's some of the early Spanish settlers and some of the early Native American. Right, we have some history of that, and so mostly what we talk about with reptiles and amphibians is 50-year-old data, maybe 100-year-old data, but for the most part, it's 50-year-old data, and it's just not very accurate. And when you look at how the state of Texas was with the grasslands and where the pronghorn antelope were, and all these different things, you can see that it's been greatly changed. It's been greatly reshaped, and it's continually doing that. And I always laugh when people say, "Oh, we're losing this," and I say, "Well, we might be, but remember that animal is dependent on certain things that weren't here 200 years ago. Box turtles can't make it through this scrub that we have. They can't crawl through it. It's just a disaster. Berlanderi are struggling to get through it. We're not burning our pastures because that became politically incorrect. We don't cross fence because fencing cost way, way too much. Areas where they have come back and started doing that, and they've returned some of the grasslands up outside of Dallas, they've had some plants that they thought had gone completely extinct for many years have now come back into these grasslands. Um, Big hurdle with some of that is the fact that the scrub brush is great for deer, and deer drives the economy here in Texas, obviously, and so there's a little bit of an issue with that, and I don't know what the solution is. It's something that's going to have to get worked out, and that's going to have to come from smarter landowners, and that's the other thing is we're failing with the landowners on educating landowners on being proper stewards of the land, not overgrazing, rotating livestock, brush control. We have another big issue too with nuke in the environment because Mrs. Jones saw a cockroach, and we're using these broad spectrum pesticides. And I have a pest control company, and I try to tell people, hey, don't nuke the whole environment. Take care of her. Deal with very specific pesticides and get rid of a roach. And in 2 months, she's going to have a problem with silverfish, and you can go and be very specific with that. When you go through and nuke everything, Mrs. Jones doesn't need you again for a very long time. And that's another deal is trying to get smarter chemical uses and so forth. And I don't know how we solve that problem either because the pest control companies, not the pest control companies, but the chemical companies, they sell the hottest, greatest chemical that just takes care of everything in one chemical.
Yes,
So
sir. Yeah.
yeah, creates a whole other avenue of issues that we have on the environment. And I sound like a tree hugger, and it's funny because I made my living managing ranches and deer hunting, and so I've had to learn a lot of this along the way. As a kid, back in the 60s and 70s, the change of oil and you poured it out on the fence line, and it was, hey, it came out of the ground, stupid, put it back. And needless to say, and that was all across the country of not, I mean, that's what people did, never thought about it. The oil came out of the ground, so we put it back on the ground. And now we realize, hey, that's a major, major problem um, doing that. But it took time for people to become educated, and I think we're working on it. I think people just need to do a better job across the board.
Yes, sir. Yeah. I mean, that's one, where, right, that's, with being into reptiles and having a focus on field herping, it's, you end up getting interested in so many aspects of nature, right? Whether it's, the moon phases or, then you start getting into the plants going, well, if this plant's around here, I know that this prey item is going to be in this area. So I'm going to focus here and focus, and so there's so much where there is so much to learn and it's so multifaceted. And if you're really into it, one thing leads you to the next thing.
Right.
And it's this ever evolving understanding because you're desperate to find whatever species it is that you're trying to check off your list or however whatever you find interesting in that part of it.
Well, part of what happens is we mature as individuals. We mature as a person. And I tell this story. When you're a kid and you're walking along, if there's a grasshopper on the sidewalk, you'll step right on them. You don't even think about it, right? You just step right on them. I was right around 40 one day, and I was walking along, and there was two grasshoppers on the sidewalk, and they were locked up. Looked like they were just going at it, right? You want to hear brown chicken, brown cow, and and all of a sudden I stepped to the side to miss them, and I stopped and I looked, and I started laughing. I go, "Oh my God, man, they just getting after it," and all of a sudden I had an appreciation for that. And at that point, I started looking at it, I go, my life is now getting ready to start counting down backwards. I hit that maturity level where grasshopper is not my favorite thing. That was my favorite bait at one time. We'd go out and catch grasshoppers for fishing and used them a lot for fishing. But now all of a sudden you start to appreciate something as simple as a couple of grasshoppers, locked up on the sidewalk. And I couldn't tell if they're male or female, but sounds good for the story that they were male and female. Hell, it could have been two males fighting over something. Who knows? I mean, I have no idea because I don't know anything about grasshoppers other than where to hook them and how to cast them. And but now all of a sudden you start appreciating all these other little things that you probably didn't appreciate as a kid. There's a few kids that did appreciate every single thing, but for the most of us, we learn to appreciate different things as we've aged and as we've matured, and some of us has matured much faster than others, and that's a very fortunate thing. And then I'm always singing, I don't want to grow up, I'm a Toys R Us kid. My wife always tells me, you need to grow up. I said, I'm never going to grow up. So I've obviously taken a little bit longer of a path, but I've been very fortunate that I've got to know several people through the years. I've got to learn a lot of things, and then starting this doing the Herp Nation radio deal. I did it under the name Tank Time, and it opened up with the sound of a machine gun. My nickname is Tank. And it became because everything in Texas is a stock tank. We call everything a stock tank. All the other friends of mine that lived in other states said it's a pond. I said, no, sir, this is a stock tank. I said, our ground doesn't hold water down here, so we have to put bentonite clay or drill in mud or something in there to seal it off to do it, and it's a tank. So they would always call me Tank. Everyone thought it was because of my bull in the China shop mentality. So my logo for that was a Sherman tank painted up with a black, gray, and orange to look like an Alterna. And so the intro started off with a machine gun going like that, and that was the intro. But what I did is started off with bringing in a lot of guests. One of the really good ones that I enjoyed was my very first guest, and is Dr. Douglas Tallamy. And he's a entomologist, but he is one hell of just a biologist across the board. And Dusty Rhodes turned me on to him. He was over in I don't know, Mississippi or somewhere for a hummingbird festival of all things, and he laid out the food web and everything, and it was quite interesting. So I was very fortunate to learn with that. But then I was very fortunate with the idea of doing snake days, which was really intended to be a joke. I started snake days because they passed these crazy laws that made snake hunting just completely illegal in the state of Texas. And they threatened if you got caught with a snake hook or snake tongs, that those were snake hunting paraphernalia and you could be charged with a crime. And I thought, well, that's BS. We'll just go pick up beer cans with it, donate the money, and call them snake tongs and snake hooks. So it started as a big, big joke, and it took off. And at the time, the state herpetologist was Dr. Andy Gluesenkamp. He got behind it. I had to do a bunch of legwork in the background, but it allowed me to talk to a lot of people that I would have never had exposure with. I mean, I'm hard headed, I'm argumentative, but it allowed me to get exposure to people that I just would have never been fortunate enough to do, and created a great work environment. I always loved working with Andy. And Nathan Raines is another great one at Texas Parks and Wildlife, and he's always out at snake days and stuff. And um, it allows you to get with these people that have a very specific um, skill in herpetology. Like I said, Andy was great on grasses and pointing out how buffalo grass was just destroying things, dropping insect loads, dropping quail populations, horned lizard, spot-tailed earless, and so forth. And then by doing snake days, it allowed me to get invited to do some of these things. I got to go on a spot-tail earless hunt. And met for the first time Dr. Corey Rolke, who's on the board now with Snake Days, and got to spend time doing these things and talking to people and learning. what they have to do and so forth, and then also getting the opportunity to be respected by them because spending so much time out in the field on how to find things and following weather patterns. Us guys that go out alterna hunting or annulata hunting, man, we follow weather patterns. There's times of the year that our TV stays on the weather channel, and we're disappointed that they don't do the updates except on the eights. We're going, no, man, do the updates about every 5 seconds. We want constant updates, watching the humidity and the barometric pressure and praying for the next frontal boundary to come through to drop that low pressure so we can get ahead of the frontal boundaries and all these different things that we've done that make us think that we know exactly how to find these animals. Then we go out and bomb and go, well, man, I thought I knew how to find them. you know and but it does work out, and so it's been a great thing to doing snake days and stuff to bring people together, and I've always said this, that there's a lot of us that we just don't get along, and we're not gonna get along, and that's all right. We don't have to get along with everybody in life, but I always tell people that for snake days everyone's welcome and we all have to get along, and if we can't get along for 2 days out of the year, um we're doomed as a society. Not just in herpetology or the herpetoculture, but we're doomed as a society. We have to have a starting point where we can get along for a certain amount of time. We can have our differences over finances, over politics, over the education system, over a lot of things. Even on some of these research projects, we can have a difference of opinion, and that's all right. But we also have to be able to get along, and if we don't do a better job of doing that, we're going to have a lot of problems, and we're also not going to like what the government's going to do. I mean, if we don't police ourselves in certain aspects, we also know that the government will police us, and we're not going to like it. I mean, we had a brief stint in here where snake hunting was just basically completely illegal in the state of Texas.
Yes, sir. Yeah. Well, and that's an interesting point. I think that, and something that we've touched on so far tonight was that, the hobby, while it's this weird thing, right, where you hear certain names that keep coming up, and there are people that introduce so many people to snake hunting. But then you hear, well, they sent him to this spot because they didn't think alterna were necessarily in that area, and they didn't want the competition. And so it is this weird nature of reptile keepers, and I definitely grew up with this ilk, and my understanding of herping, where it is very much, it's hunting in general. If you've put the time to find the area where you find this target species, whether it's hunting or herping or whatever you're into, you don't really burn that spot. And so, the idea of a snake days, and kind of where you started off early on, where, there's a picture of 30, 40, 20 of you guys all together and herping. I've never experienced that in my time field herping. When I got into it, it was, if you saw another snake hunter at the hotel, personally, I wouldn't usually communicate with that person. And it was just, I'm over here, you're over there, I'm doing my thing, we keep it private. And that's not, uncommon from what I've seen. I've been out at many hotels, and, you see the snake hunter roll in, and you don't communicate with that person at all. And so to have that mindset to go, hey, let's set this up. And also too, it was a needed thing in the time where to overcome the legislation that was there, you had to bring a large group of people together as a protest against it. And so, one, very admirable, for sure. But it's interesting how that's either lost or gained over time.
Well, and it's funny because we had a great group of people, and you're right, the people do not talk as much anymore. And there's so many stories, and including myself, where you stop and talk to somebody, you're coming down one side of the cut, they're coming down the other side of the cut. You stop and talk to them for a minute, you go beyond, and boom, you find a snake right behind them. Or it happens to you, they find a snake right behind you. We just found an alternative this year, Trey Petty and I. over in Sanderson, and it was up about 50 foot on the cut. And I stayed down with a flashlight guiding him, Morty right, Morty right, Morty right, oh, back to your left. It's, and it's going up the cut, thinking, well, it's going to go up. Well, he leans over the cut and gets his hands on there, but it gets into a crevice, and he can see it going deeper and deeper in that crevice. And he finally has to let go of it, right? And so it gets away. So we stay there. We spent 2.5 hours on there, and that snake came out underground, 150 feet over on the cut and 50 feet down, and came out at the bottom of the cut. Same cut because I had it on video when it was going up the cut. So it's definitely the same cut, the same snake, and that, it traversed all of that underground. And so these snakes can move and come out in a short period of time. Now that the time where we finally let it go, where it went in the crevice, was only 30 minutes before it covered that 150 by 50 feet underground. It moved that fast underground and came out. And we spend too much time being worried that someone else is going to find the snake. And there's been times I was walking the S curve one time, and Jeremy Forks comes along. And we always watch the guardrail, and we watch the S curve on Juno, and we, checking that. And as I'm walking, going north on the S curve, here comes Jeremy, and he locks him up, jumps out, and in the headlights, he snags the snake, and he starts doing the pee-pee dance right in the middle of the road. And I go, son of a gun, man. I would have found that snake in another, 5 minutes of walking. Maybe, maybe not. Who knows, right? Maybe the tire testers come along and hit the thing and kill it deader than a doornail, right, before I get there. Different things happen. There's certain things that are just meant to happen, and we spend too much time trying to protect that, and at the end of the day, it's kind of broke down a lot of the camaraderie that we used to have with all the people, where we'd have these gigantic get-togethers. We used to get a whole bunch of people together and take 30 people or so and go down there into Acuna and go to Ma Crosby's and go eat. And I never was big into margaritas. I've become more as I've gotten older, but I never just liked margaritas. So I'd ask for a strawberry daiquiri, and it was always the same guy. The same guy waited on us for year after year after year, stayed there. And I would ask him, I said, "Hey, do you have a strawberry daiquiri?" And the guy goes, "Si, senor, we have the best strawberry daiquiri in all of Mexico." I go, "Okay, cool, I'll take a strawberry daiquiri." And I'd get a strawberry margarita. And the next year I go, "Hey, do you have a strawberry daiquiri?" "Si, senor, the best strawberry daiquiri in all of Mexico." "Okay, cool, man, I'll take a strawberry daiquiri." After about 4 years of that, I go, "You know what? Just bring me a strawberry margarita, because that's what you're going to bring me anyways." It had lime juice in it, but we used to get these gigantic crowds together and go across once a year and go eat over in Acuna, and so much of that's changed, and we've had deals. There was John Hollister brought down this gigantic Burmese python that died. He used to keep it in his bathtub in his bathroom. You couldn't even use the damn bathtub at that one house that he had, because the Burmese python lived in it. True herper to the core. And so he puts it out on a rock cut. Someone's coming along and spotlights it. Go, what the hell? There's this gigantic berm. You know. And
Yeah.
we would do different things like that. We would tie a dead snake onto a fishing pole and hide in the brush and reel it across the road over at the Christmas Mountains, where the snake is whipping and coming across the road. And we would do that on these nights that were slow and things weren't going anywhere. That was just some of the fun that we would have. I remember one night, as me and John Fraser and Damon Southees and my first wife were all out at Sanderson, out on the East Cuts, and we all pull up. It was slow, nothing was happening, and we just start talking along Highway 90. Well, then John and his wife Barb decided to take off, heading back east, and back then everyone spotlighted. That was the norm. You hung a spotlight out the window. There's no traffic. There's nobody out there, and you spotlighted. And Damon goes, "Watch this." And Damon jogs down the road a quarter of a mile behind the truck, where John doesn't even see him. He's kind of jogging, but he's squished down. And John hangs the spotlight out the window, starts burning the cut. And Damon comes around the side, grabs him by the arm, and goes, "Ah!" And you can hear him. And you can hear John Fraser in the truck. He starts screaming like a girl. He's, "Ah, ah, ah." He jumps into his wife's lap. The truck steering wheel gets
Hell yeah.
hit, and it's a standard, and it starts going till it dies, and it's dragging the spotlight down Highway 90, because he drops the spotlight, and Damon's rolling in the middle of Highway 90, just laughing. And those are the types of things that we used to do that made it fun. We would do these different things. Another time, Damon laid down on a cut waiting for John Fraser to come along and on a little shortcut, and John's shining. All of a sudden, he jumps up and screams, and the same thing, scares the hell out of him. And we used to do these things, and we'd be out. It almost guaranteed if you want to find snakes, you had to risk your life a little bit. So you wear flip flops, walk in a cut, guaranteed you're finding a lep or a pick. I mean, there was a time we were doing that, and a pick struck between someone's legs and just barely missed him. In flip flops. And I always joked and said, "Hey, man, if you're not finding anything, put on a pair of flip flops and walk the cut. You'll find them."
Lucky flip flops.
Yeah, yeah, no, I mean, when you have to risk your life a little bit, it varied, but we've had so many different things like that. Eric Tamias used to get a lizard and tie it on a cut where he knew an alternate was at with a piece of dental floss or fishing line. And he'd tie a lizard, and there's this story where someone comes along and supposedly takes his snake, and he knows it's his because it had a piece of string hanging out of his out of the alternate's mouth. Whether that's true or not, but it's one of those stories, and it's very plausible that, hey, it ate the lizard, and it's stuck to the cut with a piece of string from the lizard. But those are the types of things that people would do: tie a lizard on there and just sit there and come back and forth and wait for that snake to come find that lizard. Nobody does that anymore. I mean, that's kind of an ingenious way to think to do things, and so many of those people like that are falling by the wayside. That I can't reiterate that enough. That there's so many people that are passing, and those stories are being lost. Like I said, I'm glad you're doing this, and I said someone needs to write a book on all the crazy snake hunting stories that we've had, and God knows we've had a bunch of them. The 1 year of Snake Days, John Hollister wasn't doing very well, and he had a hover round. And even people that don't know John Hollister, a lot of people have heard his name, in the alternate culture because he goes back so far. And him and Don Williams, Don Williams was driving a vehicle and had a trailer on there, and it was raining. Some storms were picking up, and so we were trying to stay ahead of the storms. Roy Engeldorf was hunting with me that night, and so we're heading towards Palma and Lozier. And as we're going that way, there's a spotlight coming. Even though you're not really supposed to be spotlighting, there's a spotlight coming, but it's going really, really slow. And all of a sudden it catches up to us, and John Hollister is hunting, but he's looking for Don Williams because the storms are getting ready to pound us, and he's stuck on his hover round. He's got a cigarette in his mouth. He's got a spotlight on that hover round driving down Highway 90 with a bottle of oxygen. He's got a
Hell
bottle of
yeah.
oxygen strapped to the back of that thing. He doesn't have the oxygen on, but he does have a bottle of oxygen on that stupid hover round, and he's smoking a cigarette, burning the cuts with a spotlight, driving a little electric scooter hover round for handicapped people down Highway 90. Man, you can't make that kind of stuff up. And I'm going, God, why didn't Roy and I started talking? Why didn't we video that? That's the funniest thing you'll ever see is some guy that's half handicapped at the time, but still out there smoking, burning cuts, and driving a hover around. The Buzz Ross was in the hospital 1 year, and he missed a Snake Days. And Buzz was always so cheap. So he'd show up at Snake Days, sit outside and talk to people, but he wouldn't pay the money to come in to the lectures or anything. I mean, he wouldn't need. He was too cheap, right? And so Buzz gets bit by a Arizona blacktail, and he's not doing very well. He gets medevaced out. They're over. They're hitting him with too much crofab. It's reacting. He's having a severe reaction. They're giving him a whole new envenomation just from the crofab that they've given so many vials and stuff. And he's trying to leave, and they're threatening him. If you leave, the insurance isn't going to cover it. And he said, "Please, please, call somebody. You're killing me." And he wasn't doing too good. And so even though John and Buzz, go way back, they were still also very competitive. They were friends, but they're very competitive. So John, knowing he's in the hospital, we're at 1 year of Snake Days, and we're at the 5 mile east cut on Highway 90, and me and Jerry Salmon and I can't remember John Hollister and several other people. And John's telling the story, and they're telling a story about how a guy gets bit by a pictogaster, and it was believed that you could shock the venom out of people. So there was this deal where you would get someone to hold on to a screwdriver, and you stick it into the coil of your car, and you crank it over, and you about killed them. You about almost electrocuted them. And so I don't even remember who that was now. Someone's going to hear this and go, "That was so and so," and I can't remember who it was now. And he was saying, "I can't take it anymore. You're going to kill me. You're going to kill me." And Buzz comes walking up and shoves him into the bumper, and just at the time they crank it so he grounds out, and John Hollister's telling the story, and here's Buzz about dying from a molossus bite, and John's telling the story, and he goes, and then local snake bite expert Buzz Ross shows up on the scene, and that was his smart aleck comment, knowing that Buzz Ross got bit. So John's calling him the local snake bite expert and telling this story, and those are the things that are dying and going away. But yeah, we used to electrocute people. A lot of
Yes.
times we had station wagons back then. We didn't have all the SUVs, so you'd have a station wagon. John Hollister had a tourist station wagon, and oh God, different people had those Ford station wagons and stuff, and those were, and a lot of those ran big blocks. We got horrible gas mileage, but that's what we had for snake hunting. And now you see these guys in little bitty cars, but yeah, we hook people up to a coil and crank it over and tell them to shut up, that we were saving their life. And,
Well, yeah, it's so funny, right? I had never heard that till recently, and I was talking to my friend Paul, and he brought that up, that there was even a product that was sold
yes,
that it wasn't necessarily marketed towards human use, but they said it worked on dogs. I'd never heard that up until that point, very recently, but it's very funny to hear it come up, and then to hear it again, almost again in the Herper version of it, where it's straight into the car battery, rock and roll, let's go.
yeah, no, I mean that was it,
So
because herpers weren't going to buy a $50 shocker, right? And my
yes.
grandfather had this deal. His horse got bit by a rattlesnake, right? And all these old timers say this. So you would take a live chicken, split it in half, and then wrap part of that chicken around the bite on the horse's leg, and it would, quote, suck the venom out, right? And I would try to tell him, I said, Papa, that horse is 1,200 pounds. It wasn't going to die from that snake bite. But he swore that, that it was the old split chicken husbandry technique for the rattlesnake bite would work. And I said, well, I'm not wrapping a damn chicken around my leg if I get bit by an Atrox. I'll go seek some medical attention and not rely on my grandfather to save my life with the chicken deal. But he swore by it. We've had all kinds of things through the years. But again, that's part of the color that's being lost, and um, everybody's an expert now, including myself, and there's just so many things that people had to learn from trial and error. Like I said, finding alternative, starting at Eagle Pass, you didn't know where to go. You just started driving, and you just drove all night. You pulled over. You slept in a ditch. Back then, Highway 90 is a little bitty thing, and low water crossings, everything like that, and people would just sleep on a rest area. The rest areas came later. Back then, they weren't even doing that. There's an old story, and it was a story with Jack Reed with the Herpetological Society. They took a group of people out to what's now Seminole Canyon State Park, and I think this was back even before the state park had it. And they were looking for lepidus, and they couldn't find any lepidus. Weather wasn't cooperating. Nobody found any lepidus. They were out there several days with quite a few people. And back then, the tents didn't have bottoms in there or anything like that. And I've heard this story from other people besides Jack Reed that was there. And they go and pull up the sleeping bags to break camp, and they find a pair of leps under someone's sleeping bag that moved in there for warmth at what's now Seminole Canyon State Park. And the strangest things like that happened. I mean, that's how they were. You just slept with they didn't put tarps in the bottom. You just put up a tent and you threw a sleeping bag on there, and the wind always, you talked about camp, and John Fraser was so cheap, he used to always camp up there, and the wind would always blow and snap the tent poles. The tents could not take the wind that Seminole Canyon would get. And so later on, when he was camping, he'd bring his family. He got where you could buy replacement broom handles. So he'd bring broom handles and tape. In the middle of the night, you wake up being suffocated because the tent pole snapped and the tent's laying down on top of your face. And you can jump up and somebody push it up in the middle, and you take the wooden broom handle and you duct tape it to the tent pole that snapped, and that's how you made your week-long camp out at Seminole Canyon, so you could go herping.
And that's I feel at one of these points I'm gonna have to do a camping herping trip, and it's so funny, hearing about John Hollister, scootering down the road still herping, where the whole reason why I started my business was to be able to spend more time field herping. And well, for so many reasons I started this business, but that being one of the majors, like 2 weeks a year isn't enough time. I need more time. And for the most part, I have not been getting to do much field herping. And so when you hear those stories, you go, man, I'm just being a puss, and I need to get out there more and make it work one way or the other. So it's good motivation to make it happen no matter what.
Well, and take kids. I was really we were all up, not all, but a lot of us were up in Austin testifying to legislatures over the law. And this congresswoman, I forget her name, she was just appalled that we would take our kids out into the field to go herping, that it was too dangerous. She was just livid over this idea. And it's our time to be able to teach and educate our children on a lot of different things, not just herping, but just life in general. And just like you and I are telling stories here today, I mean, it was your ability to tell stories to your kids. Hey, we were out here one time with your Uncle Buddy, and we did this and this and this, and different things like that. And that is your time with those kids to be able to educate them. We don't need the government to educate our kids from the womb to the tomb, which is being attempted now. And I I like to see more people get out there and do these things. And the other thing that happened is that years ago, growing up as a kid around Jack Reed and stuff, we always knew that he had a lizard named after him and published papers and stuff like that, but never really saw it. A lot of that stuff went into these Mexican herpetological journals. And after he passed away, some things come up with Tom Lott writing this memorial for him, and something come up about this publication. And so I was talking to Dr. Travis LeDuc over at UT, and he goes, "I've got that paper here somewhere." I said, "Really?" He goes, "Yeah." And it was on the blind snake feeding, right? And him and Tom Lott witnessed that, and first time it had ever been witnessed, the blind snake feeding in the wild, and so they published a paper on it. And then they also did some put some blind snakes in an aquarium and did some research and did all this other stuff and so forth. And so I got that paper and I made a copy and I gave it to all the kids. I gave it to my one of my best friends, Jeff, and then his younger brother and his sister and his older brother. And when you saw their face, the look on their face, I mean, it brought them so much joy to see this paper that their dad published, a scientific paper so many years ago. And right then and there, I thought, you can go through life and that's fine. Or you can go through life and you can leave legacies for your grandkids and kids to find. And right then and there, and Myra Olavitas, she talked me into doing a publication on a Cope's gray tree frog that I found that wasn't supposed to be in that area. I'd never been found in that area and so forth. And I've taken that to heart. And Jerry Salmon has been a big part of that. He's very good at that. Him and I've gone back and researched some incorrect localities and gotten them straightened out. And we were just talking about doing another one now for a suboc that's not a valid it's a valid specimen, all right, but it's definitely not within the area that it was found, and so forth. And so I always encourage people, if you see something like that, take the time and work with somebody and publish it, and right now it's probably not a very important piece of information, but one day it's going to be when you start looking at what's happened to our box turtles and our Mexican hognose and so many other species. I'm just using those for example. Um, you just never know when it's going to be the very last long nose that you ever see. And if you find something unique about it, it's worth preserving that with photos and with documentation, which is, and iNaturalist is a great way to do it. That iNaturalist has come on so big here in Texas because of Dr. Andy Glusenkamp and because of Snake Days. The first money that we raised for TPWD was going to develop an app, and Andy and Cullen Hanks, when he was there at TPWD, they were able to get a lot of the source code and stuff for iNaturalist, and they modified it a little bit in the beginning for TPWD. But we've gone here from the state of Texas with people getting more into it, from getting 3 um, uh, museum type of photo vouchers to Texas Parks and Wildlife, to getting thousands a year. When you look at what iNaturalist has done, it's just huge. Schools are doing it, and so I want to see more people get out there and do that. And if they really find something unique or range extension, publish it in some of the herpetological journals as well, that preserves that and gets it into other aspects for other researchers to use. Yeah, I think it's a very important deal, and I think a lot of times people are intimidated, and if my dumbass can do it, someone else can. I mean, it's just that I'm horrible at writing, and if I can get enough information down and make umpteen million corrections and get it published, then anyone can.
Yes, sir. Yeah, it's a good thing I'm married. My wife makes me look much smarter than I actually am. She proofreads everything you ever see me post. So
Oh
yeah.
my God, I've written some things for Snake Days, and the board said, okay, you're not allowed to publish anything on behalf of Snake Days without getting it approved, because I can write a whole page with commas. Man, they call me the king of comma, and I was born with dyslexia, and it's greatly affected me. But um, yeah, no, it's I've been very fortunate, and and I'm really glad at the direction Snake Days has gone. And the first year we did it, we had roughly 175 people come through there. We've had people come in from, and I lost track now, either 5 or 6 different countries. One year I looked up and there was an Asian couple there, a man and wife, and I looked up there and I told them, I said, I think maybe y'all are in the wrong place. And they said, no, no, we're from Malaysia and we were visiting Washington DC, and we heard about this deal, and so they changed their vacation midstream and went from Washington DC to Sanderson, Texas. And I go, oh my God, well, welcome. How crazy is that it was spread that far across the country, and even across the world, and so we've had people from Canada, Malaysia, Germany, God, I think Czechoslovakia. I can't even remember all the places now where people have come in. So it's been a good thing, and it's gone on for, it's been around for 13 years. There was one year we didn't do it, and so it's been around for 13, and we've had 12 Snake Days now. So it's gone on for quite some time.
Yes, sir. Yeah. Well, so I mean, one thing I think that is very obvious. I think we need to have, for sure, even early on here, we need to have a part 2, where we make sure we focus on you, because I think that's the most interesting thing. But I've loved where we've tangented off to throughout this conversation. We've hit so many great points. So thank you so much. I've been as much of a listener to this as anyone else. I'm enjoying myself very much so, which is the whole reason why I wanted to start this and do this, was getting to have conversations like this. So beautiful. I love it. Thank you.
Well, I greatly appreciate it, and I'd love to do part 2 and just dive into the beginning, to where we are now, as to how it's progressed, because I've definitely been lucky. I've definitely made some great friends, and even some great enemies that we still talk. I mean, there's several people that we don't get along on anything outside of reptiles and amphibians, and if we do, it's not going to be a pleasant conversation, but then we can still come together. And I still consider those very important people in my life, even though we are totally opposite on certain aspects, whether it's politics or finance or whatever the scenario is. But we still get together Mr. Troy Hibbets and I, we butt heads like nobody's business, but we talked here just recently I was talking to him trying to get some information together for this sub-oc paper that I need to put together. And so it's very important that we can do that. I just can't reiterate that enough. And so I feel very privileged that I even have good people that I don't get along with.
Yeah, and that's the beautiful part about the hobby. Something that I think I'd be amiss to not bring up and ask if you'd run into him. What was did you ever get to meet the Chamberlains? And what was that like if you did?
I did. They became very little bit territorial at times. Once you got to know them, they were very nice, but they would always, this was a money making venture. They put their kids through college, and the famous Blair's Cave, they'd call it, and they would go out and scour around Langtree and pick it up and say, "Oh well, we got this out of the famous Blair's Cave." And but there was times, and then there was times before Bill passed away that he thought that snake hunting should be stopped. And Doris was still around. She was supposed to, and I'm not sure if she is now, but she was supposed to come to Snake Days one year, and they were the beginning of the alternate out there, just kind of stumbling across it. And then you had the John Hollisters and the Dave Barkers, and the world famous, and he's out there hunting right now, the Delaware Kid, Mike Geiger, and but yeah, I got to meet Bill, and I talked to him over the phone on a couple of different occasions on things. And certain people were in real tight with him. I came in towards the tail end of that in the 80s, and so I wasn't fortunate enough, like some people were, to know him and so forth. And of course, he was the only place you could get a flat tire change. I was the only tire machine. And if Bill Chamberlain didn't feel like messing with it that evening, you stayed there, and he would do it the next day. You were there, and he had a hotel. You could rent a room in the hotel. You had Denny Miller that would go over there and do some work, and the Chamberlains would feed him while he was working on the best paper ever written on gray-banded king snakes. For his thesis. And so the Chamberlains were a big, big part, and they adopted different people into their little family, so to speak, and either changed their flat tire, or fed them, or bartered over a room. Because herpers are always cheap. I mean, even if it was a good deal, we still want to feel like we one up somebody. So you could be renting a room for $10, and you would still try to haggle it down to $9.
Yeah. No, and again, there's so many aspects to modern day reptile keeping that I think is lost. Something that I was very lucky enough to get very early on in my alternate keeping was I was able to acquire Ray Duncan's collection.
Oh yeah.
And one of the things that came with that was a snake rack, for lack of better terms, that was built by him and Gebhard. And what was very cool is later on I got to meet Mr. Gebhardt and hang out with him and go over and see his collection, and to see where that early wooden cage that I still have in my garage, I don't use it, but I'm like, this is the coolest thing. Like, it needs to be in a museum. And to see where that started, and to see a second prototype, and then to see that, okay, we'll move to racking because that was a better way to keep it. And so to see that evolution over time, or hearing guys talk about, breaking down refrigerators to get the heating cord out of that, and that was early belly heat. Where are people going to see that? Where's the appreciation of that? It's not out there.
Yeah, most definitely. Yeah, if we do a part 2, we can go into it, because I've got a very good story on the first Freedom Breeder type of rack systems that were done, and it was not done by Freedom Breeder. And so when we do part two, we'll go into that because there's a lot of different deals on how I learned how to manipulate window units to be able to cool rooms down. So yeah, I've done a lot of things. That would be a good topic to go into a lot of that type of aspects.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Well, you know what? I think we should leave people wanting more, and I very much so enjoyed my conversation. So, unless there's any other points you want to hit or anything you want to make sure we get in part one here, we'll probably call it for tonight, and then continue this in the future for sure.
I greatly appreciate it. Thank you for having me on. I really enjoyed it.
Thank you for taking a part in it, and I look forward to part two. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir.
Let me zoom out on you here. Okay, you got a message for the time capsule?
Yeah, and it's simply this. My prediction for you is that even though you'll forget all about this in some way consciously, next summer at about this time, you'll remember to return.